We're in late July and we're going to have a look at some of the 5 species in the Hoheria family. Not all of them flower in July, and there are 2 of the 5 New Zealand species which actually flower a bit later in the year, so we'll have to come back to them in late August or more probably in September. But there are several varieties which are out, and we'll have a look at 3 or 4 of them. In fact, rather more than that when I come to think about it. So what defines a Hoheria? They're a genus of plants that come solely from New Zealand. They're shrubs or small trees. They're tenderish in that, you know, maybe in the colder parts of the country you'd be growing them up against a wall or in a very sheltered area. But anywhere near the southern coastline, probably south of Birmingham, they're perfectly fine to grow outside, providing you don't put them in the teeth of the wind. And they have a fairly upright habit. They're not going to grow enormous. And let's face it, there aren't very many trees which flower away with a hell of a show in middle of the summer. Maybe plenty in the herbaceous border, but in the woodland garden there isn't so much. So the first one we're going to look at is Hoheria Stardust. And this is actually a form of Hoheria sexstylosa. And sexstylosa is, as a species, is not yet in flower, or not here at Caerhays anyway. But this is a named form called Hoheria Stardust. It was named by Roy Lancaster, and it was a seedling which was first discovered on the island of Bute. It has a very upright habit. It has quite an attractive leaf, and it's extremely floriferous. And the butterflies and red beetles, which you can see gently copulating their way through these flowers, having an absolute whale of a time and enjoying themselves enormously. And who wouldn't, with a wonderful display of flowers like this? So this is Hoheria Borde Hill, and it's actually a hybrid between 2 species, Hoheria sexstylosa and Hoheria angustifolia, and we'll go and look at angustifolia later on in this little video. You see here a rather different leaf shape to the one we've just looked at. The flowers are maybe quite similar, but the arrangement of the flowers at the tips of the branches is slightly different, but it's very floriferous. Not a hugely attractive scent, a small scent, but a scent which clearly insects are very attracted to. Again, a very upright habit, a rather darker bark, and a tree that obviously needs a bit of a stake in its first 2 or 3 years to get going. But what you start to see is this rather peculiar bark structure where the bark seems to flake away, and that is something that we'll see on Hoheria angustifolia, which is a very notable characteristic of that particular species. But anyway, another really nice plant, another different variety of Hoheria, but there are a few more to see yet. So here's another named hybrid, and here the flowers are nearly over. This is a cross between Hoheria glabrata and Hoheria sexstylosa, and it's got a peculiar name. It's called Glory of Amlwch, and I said the name quickly because you spell Amlwch A-M-L-W-C-H. I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that, but anyway, it's a place in Dorset where this very nice variety and quite early flowering by Hoheria standards was found. You can see there's just the odd flower left on the flowering trusses, and a nice little bit of mauve colouring on the stamens when you look closely. Here you've got many fewer flowers in the trusses, much larger flower, and a much larger and more distinct leaf with serrations on. And here we can begin to see another feature of Hoherias, which is that their immature leaves are much narrower and more serrated than the more mature leaves. And as the plants grow and develop, they start to lose their serrations. They never lose them completely, but they become fatter and chubbier, and that is a distinction which Hoherias have, and many other New Zealand plants as well, that the leaf form changes a little bit as the plant matures. And the three plants we've looked at so far were planted about 7 or 8 years ago. They've got up to 10 feet or so, and they're flowering decently. This one could do with another stake. And next to it, although not yet in flower, we've got another one which has been blown over in the wind, and this is a form of Hoheria sexstylosa, which is known as Crataegifolia. In other words, its flowers and habit is a bit like a Crataegus, or so it's said. You can see, I suppose the leaves do look a bit like a Crataegus. There's going to be plenty of bud to come, but I would say it's about 3 weeks away from appearing. And it's slightly different here in that not all the flowers are right at the tip of the shoot. Most of the flower buds are slightly further back on this year's new growth, but Hoherias do flower on the new growth, not on the old growth, so they need to grow away well in a wet summer, or in a warm wet summer, which is I think what we've probably now turned into, to produce a good crop of flowers, as we're about to see here. So now we're looking at another species of Hoheria, and this is Hoheria angustifolia. And as you can see, the flowers are very much smaller than any of the other Hoherias we've looked at so far, but they may be smaller, but the sheer volume and quantity of flowers, as we'll see in a minute when we look back at the tree from a distance, is really quite considerable. This tree is now about 30 feet tall. It was planted in 1991, and so it's made rapid progress, and like all Hoherias, it's a quick growing upright tree which has been flowering from a very early age and is extremely good value. But as we mentioned earlier, one of the problems that we growers have with this Hoheria is that the bark does look as though a rat has gnawed it, and here and there on the trunk the bark sort of splits and fissures. And over the years that I've been at Burncoos, which is coming on for 40, I think we've probably had 4 or 5 letters from people saying we've sent them a Hoheria which a rat has gnawed the trunk of it, and we say no, the rat hasn't gnawed the trunk of it, that's how it looks anyway. So it's an unusual and distinguishing feature. But let's just take a step back and have a look at this amazing tree from a distance. And when we look up into the top of the tree, you know, you can hardly see the leaves for the vast quantity of flowers. You can see also how the branchlets are pendulous. Many Hoherias have a somewhat pendulous habit, but angustifolia has a partially pendulous habit and more lower down in the bush. And as we look here, you can see that actually the few of the bits that haven't got very many flowers on at all, or just the odd flower here or there, are the most pendulous bits of all. And that's of course where we'd probably look to take our cuttings. So that's the extent of the Hoherias we can look at today, but we will revert to part 2 in about a month or 6 weeks' time and look at the other species and see what they're doing that's a bit different.